Andres de AA Sports here with another video covering Mexican football and the Mexico National Team. Major news on Tuesday from the Mexico National Team with the FIFA preliminary roster deadline being on Tuesday. The Mexico National Team has announced and confirmed their 55-player preliminary roster for the 2026 FIFA World Cup. While this is not the final roster that Mexico will have for the World Cup, the final 26-player roster will be made of players coming from this preliminary list, which means those who are not part of this 55-player prelista will not be going to the World Cup. And there are some players included that we expected to be on this list, as well as some surprises with some players fans didn't want or expect on this list being included, along with notable players that were left off the list as well. With that, in this video, I will give my analysis of the preliminary roster for Mexico and talk about some of the notable players that are included and could be part of the World Cup team for Mexico, and players that were excluded and will not be part of Mexico's World Cup roster. Starting with the goalkeepers included in the preliminary roster are Alex Padilla, Antonio Rodriguez, Carlos Acevedo, Carlos Moreno, Raúl Talarangel, and Guillermo Ochoa, who has stated that he will retire from the Mexico National Team after the World Cup. Ochoa is included in the preliminary roster for what will be his 6th and final World Cup. In terms of the goalkeepers, it does look like Raúl Rangel, Memo Ochoa, and Carlos Acevedo will be the 3 goalkeepers for Mexico in the World Cup, and that Moreno, Padilla, and Rodriguez are included in case an injury occurs, which hopefully not. I would be surprised if Javier Aguirre decides to call up any of the other 3 goalkeepers, mainly because after Malagon's injury, the 3 goalkeepers Aguirre has always called up have been Rangel, Ochoa, and Acevedo. In terms of Talarangel, I have said that he has looked shaky and mistake-prone at times, but he is the goalkeeper Aguirre seems to prefer, and he is the most in form of these 3 main candidates as of recent, with 6 clean sheets in the Clausura with Chivas and 7 in total this season. And while he hasn't been tested a lot in the games he has played for Mexico recently, he no longer looks as shaky in form. With that, realistically, not only will Rangel likely be in the final roster, he will probably be the starting goalkeeper for Mexico in the World Cup. As for Guillermo Ochoa, he will also likely be included in the final roster for what will be his final World Cup with the Mexico National Team. And while there are some fans who have criticized him in the later stages of his career, they always talk about how he concedes goals but never like to talk about when he plays well. And these fans want him out of the team already. In my opinion, this is a well-deserved call-up, and including him is the correct decision. Memo Ochoa, while playing in Cyprus with AEL Limassol this year, has 6 clean sheets and played a big part in his team having a competitive Cypriot Cup campaign. He has actually been pretty solid in Cyprus. Ochoa also brings great leadership to the team. His presence in the locker room has always made a positive impact. With that, I do think he deserves to be one of the 3 goalkeepers for Mexico one final time. Hopefully, Mexico dominates and wins Group A within their first 2 games, so that we hopefully do get to see Ochoa in the 3rd game versus Czechia, and we get to see him play one more time for Mexico in Estadio Azteca. I think that would be great to see. As for Acevedo, I am not so convinced. And in my opinion, I don't think he should be included in the final roster. Acevedo had a pretty solid apertura with Santos, where he was honestly the reason they were in any sort of relevance. However, he had a terrible clausura, where he was conceding at least 2 goals in almost every game. However, his performances during the Apertura seem to have been enough to convince Aguirre, and with that, he will likely be the 3rd goalkeeper on the final roster. Personally, I would call up either Padilla or Moreno instead of Acevedo. Padilla is the young prospect playing in Europe with Bilbao and will be part of the next cycle. As for Moreno, he has been very good with Pachuca, who made the semifinals of the Clausura playoffs with him as their main goalkeeper. So for me, while I would prefer for the three goalkeepers in the final roster to be Tala, Rangel, Memo Ochoa, and Padilla, it looks like it will be Acevedo with Rangel and Ochoa in the final roster, with the other three goalkeepers being called up right now just in case an injury occurs, which hopefully not, especially after what happened with Malagon. Nevertheless, hopefully we do see Rodriguez, Moreno, and especially Padilla get their opportunity at the start of the next cycle. Hopefully they get their opportunities, as the goalkeeper position will really be up for grabs with no Malagon and Ochoa retiring after the World Cup. We'll see what happens. Alright, so moving on to the defenders included. Aguirre has included 16 defenders in the preliminary roster. They are Brian Gonzalez, Cesar Montes, Eduardo Aguila, Everardo Lopez, Israel Reyes, Jesus Angulo, Jesus Gallardo, Jesus Gomez, three Jesuses among the defenders, Johan Vasquez, Jorge Sanchez, Julian Araujo, Luis Rey, Mateo Chavez, Ramon Juarez, Richard Ledesma, and Victor Guzman are all the defenders included in the preliminary roster. The main defensive position to watch here is the right back position, starting with the most notable player not included in the roster, Rodrigo Huescas. This was a player that Aguirre preferred and favored and made it clear. Aguirre waited until the FIFA preliminary roster deadline, hoping for a miracle and that Rodrigo Huescas would be 100% recovered from his knee injury to play. That is no longer the case, and Huescas has been ruled out due to not being fully recovered from his ACL injury that he sustained in October. And this was the right call by Aguirre. Huescas is just barely beginning full training sessions with Copenhagen again. He is not in game shape. With that, it is best to let Huescas fully recover, and hopefully we do see him back on the team in their first games after the World Cup. With that, three right backs will be competing to make the final roster for Mexico: Julian Araujo, Ledesma, and Jorge Sanchez. Based on form and how they have performed with the national team, Araujo and Ledesma should be the right backs that make the final roster. Jorge Sanchez has had good performances defensively, but has also had moments where he was the worst player on the field for Mexico. Meanwhile, Ledesma and Araujo have both made more positive impacts with Mexico and at the club level. However, Araujo has been battling a hamstring injury, while Jorge Sanchez is now battling through a back injury. So there is a bit of an injury crisis in the right back position, and it honestly might come down to which one of them is more healthy come the final roster deadline. Hopefully, Julian Araujo will be 100% soon, as in my opinion, he and Ledesma should be the right backs for Mexico in the tournament. As for the center backs, Cesar Montes, Johan, and Israel Reyes are without a doubt going to be part of the final roster. With that, while Victor Guzman, Luis Rey, Ramon Juarez, and Jesus Gomez are included in this preliminary list, I don't see them making the final roster. Montes and Vasquez are the two best Mexico has right now and will clearly be the starting center backs. Meanwhile, Israel Reyes is the next best after them and is a versatile defender on the right side. With that, I think the only two players who are genuinely competing to make the final roster among the center backs are Everardo Lopez and Eduardo Aguila. With Chiquete Orozco ruled out due to his ankle injury, these have been the two players Aguirre has been calling up. Aguila played in Mexico's January games and had a very good performance versus Panama, so he would be a good option. However, Lopez in particular looks to be the main candidate to be the depth option as the second left-footed center back, along with Johan, who will be a starting player. Lopez had a great U20 World Cup in Chile. He is a starting player for Toluca and recently scored an absolute golazo in the Conca Champions semifinals. With that, in my opinion, he should be the fourth center back and the player that makes the final roster as the left-footed center back along with Johan Vasquez. However, maybe during the May training camp, Aguirre saw something really good in Aguila that will make this a difficult decision. We'll see who he chooses between these two players come the final roster deadline. As for the spots on the roster for the left back position, it is between Mateo Chavez, Brian Gonzalez, and Jesus Gallardo. The one player who I 100% think should be on the final roster is Mateo Chavez. He is the best left back Mexico has right now. He had a very good season with AZ Alkmaar, winning the Dutch Cup with them. And in my opinion, he should be the starting left back for Mexico in the World Cup. In terms of the other two players, it will be very interesting to see who Javier Aguirre chooses. Jesus Gallardo has been a main player so far for Aguirre. Now, many fans don't like Gallardo and want the team to move on without him, with the big reason for this being Gallardo's lack of ability to push up and contribute offensively with the national team, along with certain flaws in his defensive game and the idea of it simply being time to call up younger players instead. And yes, these are valid arguments, and I totally agree that regardless, Gallardo should not be part of the team in the next cycle. But in terms of right now, he has been great for Toluca with 3 goals and an assist in their Conca Champions campaign. And given Aguirre does have a defense-first style of play, maybe he does once again, lean towards him and chooses to call up Gallardo. However, Brian Gonzalez has had a very good clausura with Chivas, and many would argue that he can do all the things that Gallardo can, but better. With that, I do think Mateo Chavez will be one of the 2 left backs in the final roster. It would be criminal if he isn't. And the second spot will be between Gallardo and Gonzalez, where it will be interesting to see how the competition between these 2 players to make the World Cup will unfold and who Aguirre will choose to call up for the final roster. Moving on to the midfielders included in the preliminary roster: Edson Alvarez, Alexis Gutierrez, Alvaro Fidalgo, Brian Gutierrez, Efraín Álvarez, Elias Montiel, Eric Sánchez, Eric Lira, Gilberto Mora, Jeremy Márquez, Joran Carrillo, Kevin Castañeda, Luis Chávez, Luis Romo, Marcel Ruiz, Ober Vargas, Orbelín Pineda, Jesus Angulo from Toluca, Tronco Rodriguez, and Denzel Garcia has been included this time as a midfielder. Starting off with the obvious player that should not be here, Tronco Rodriguez. And yes, I call him Tronco Rodriguez because he is a horrible player. According to Gibran Araige and multiple sources, in a last-minute change made by Javier Aguirre, Tronco Rodriguez will not be part of the World Cup roster due to tactical reasons. Essentially, because he is a terrible player that doesn't fit in Aguirre's system. However, after being excluded from the training camp roster, he is now on the preliminary roster again. Hopefully, this is simply to complete the 55-player list and that he doesn't actually get called up for the final roster. But even if it's just the preliminary roster, seeing him included in it is just an absolute disgrace. Tronco Rodriguez is easily the worst player in the history of the Mexico national team. He has played in 68 games for Mexico, more than Hugo Sanchez. 0 goals, only one mediocre assist. And outside of that one moment, he has been the worst player and nothing but a liability for the team. Every time he plays, it's practically 11 versus 10 or 12 versus 10 because he is so bad to where it helps the other team. He was booed in Estadio Azteca in March versus Portugal. All Mexico fans hate him. He doesn't take accountability for his awful mistakes and when he plays badly. And there are several players on this same list who have clearly proven they are better than him. Again, hopefully this is simply to complete the 55 player list and that Tronco Rodriguez doesn't actually get called up for the final roster. But even if it's just the preliminary roster, seeing Tronco included in it is just a disgrace. Mexico is much better without him, to where at this point he shouldn't even be in any preliminary roster. As for Marcel Ruiz, he was not included in the training camp roster either, but has been included in this preliminary roster, and I do not agree with this in any way. Ruiz is trying to play through a torn ACL. This is extremely dangerous, and in my opinion, the risks are not worth it. He is putting both the short-term and long-term future of his career in serious risk. And the last thing anyone wants to see is for him to injure himself even more in the process. I mean, listen, your heart goes out for Ruiz. And I respect the motivation and determination. But at the end of the day, regardless of what game or tournament it is, the safety, health, and well-being of the players is the first and biggest priority. If Aguirre is not going to call up Huescas after he has fully recovered from his knee surgery and is training with Copenhagen again because he isn't 100% in game shape, Ruiz should not be called up either in his state right now. Hopefully, Aguirre does not call him up and talks him out of it, and that Ruiz gets the surgery he needs and has a quick and full recovery. Other players that are included right now, and likely just in the case of an injury, are Alexis Gutierrez, Jeremy Marquez, Kevin Castañeda, Luis Romo, Eric Sanchez, Jesus Angulo, and Denzel Garcia. While some of these players have had good seasons in Liga MX, none of these players have made a significant impact when given an opportunity with the Mexico National Team recently, and some of these players aren't even in good form with their clubs. When it comes to Alexis Gutierrez and Eric Sanchez, in my opinion, this is coming from an America fan, the only player from America, in my opinion, who deserves to be on the final roster is Israel Reyes, because everyone else has been in poor form. Luis Romo has been given his opportunities with the national team, and he isn't good enough. And he also hasn't been as notable with Chivas. As for Denzel Garcia and Angulo, while they may be solid with their respective clubs, at the same time, they haven't stood out in any way that says they deserve to be at the World Cup. With that, I think these players are in the preliminary roster just to add depth in case of any injuries, but I don't see any of these players being part of the final roster. Moving on to more of the main midfielders, this is where there is competition among the players to make the World Cup roster, because there is a good argument for many, if not every single one of these players, as to why they should be part of Mexico's World Cup team. Starting off with Luis Chavez, who has returned from his ACL injury and is playing again for Dynamo Moscow. Chavez has been a player that has been great for Mexico on set plays and free kicks. However, he doesn't look the same after his injury, and his form has not been great in his first games back. And honestly, with the younger midfielders who have impressed recently, I won't be surprised if he isn't included in the final roster. I don't think he will be part of Mexico's World Cup team. It is unfortunate, and you wonder if it would have been different if he didn't get injured during the Gold Cup last year. Edson Alvarez and Eric Lira are included and will surely be part of the final roster, as they are the two main defensive midfielders. Alvaro Fidalgo played really well with the team in March and has made an instant positive impact. I'll say the same thing for Ober Vargas. And Gilberto Mora is Mexico's best prospect and is already a starting caliber player for the team. All of these players should and likely will be part of Mexico's World Cup team. It would be crazy and very questionable if they are not included in the final roster. I will even say the same thing for Orbelin Pineda, who just had a great year in Greece with AEK Athens, winning his second Greek Super League championship as one of their main midfielders who would play in almost every game for them. It would be crazy if Aguirre would leave any of our top, it would be crazy if he left any of the team's top players in Europe off the team when they are some of Mexico's best players. However, in terms of Brian Gutierrez, Efrain Alvarez, Elias Montiel, and Jordan Carrillo, I do think there is a battle between these players to try and impress Aguirre and make the World Cup team. And there is a good argument for each one of these four players as to why they should be part of the World Cup team for Mexico. Efrain Alvarez, great to see him on this list. He was part of the Nations League Finals and Gold Cup rosters in 2025, but never got playing time. Despite his good form with Chivas, he really hasn't been given an opportunity to showcase himself with Aguirre and the national team. Does Aguirre potentially call him up to play in the games versus Ghana and Australia? And what will Aguirre decide if Efrain plays well? It could be very interesting. Elias Montiel is a player we know will be part of the next cycle with Rafa Marquez, but after a great U20 World Cup in Chile, a really good individual performance in both the Intercontinental Cup and Club World Cup with Pachuca, as well as playing well with Pachuca in the Clausura playoffs right now, could he be part of the World Cup team next month and be not just part of the future of the team, but the present? As for Jordan Carrillo, he is a rising player who over the last month with Pumas has really picked up form and just had a great 2-game series versus Club America with 2 goals and an assist. Maybe Aguirre will consider this and, maybe call up a player who hasn't been part of the national team in recent games, but is in good form now. But the main candidate is Brian Gutierrez, who made his national team debut in January and has made an instant positive impact, bringing a lot of offensive creativity to the team. He played very well in March, and depending on the form of Mexico's main wingers, could even start as a more offensive player for Mexico in the World Cup. However, with other rising players just like himself included in Mexico's preliminary roster, he will have to play well in the team's next games in order to maintain his spot in Aguirre's depth chart. And with 4 young midfielders on the rise, it will also make Mexico's preparation games versus Ghana and Australia very important in Aguirre deciding which one of these rising Liga MX players he calls up for the final roster. But overall, the midfield part of the preliminary roster has a lot of depth from players who likely won't make the final roster but are available to step in if an injury occurs, to players in good form in Europe like Fidalgo and Vargas, to rising young players in the Liga MX like Montiel and Gutierrez, who are looking to be both the future and part of the present of the team. And given 2 years ago entering the Copa America that the midfield was the weakest part of the team, this is very good to see for the Mexico national team. And finally, moving on to the last part of the preliminary roster, the offensive front. Alexis Dominguez, Diego Lainez, Isaías Violante, Jorge Rubalcaba, Alexis Vega, Hormiga González, César El Chino Huerta, Germán Beterame, Guillermo Martínez, Julián Quiñones, Raúl Piojo Alvarado, and Santiago Jimenez are the players included in the offensive front of the preliminary roster. I'll start with the winger positions because there are players included that, in my opinion, should not be here. And one notable omission and player who, in my opinion, should have been included in this roster and should have been called up this entire time, but has not been. Starting with the players who, in my opinion, have been included but really shouldn't and I don't think will make the final roster at all. Isaías Violante and Piojo Alvarado. In the case of Violante, while he did score and look relatively solid with America in the 2-game series versus Pumas in the playoffs of the Clausura, Outside of that, he really hasn't made a notable impact with Club America that makes you say he should be called up. He was almost non-existent at times for the team. I am very surprised that he was included in this list, but this is likely just in case of an injury, and I don't see him making the World Cup team, nor should he. As for Piojo Alvarado, you can say similar things about Piojo that I said about Isaías Violante. Piojo Alvarado is the one player that has not contributed much of anything offensively on what has been an excellent Chivas team this year that has had a great offensive front. And with the national team, Piojo has been even worse. He was non-existent in the Gold Cup, where he didn't even have one single shot on target. He was easily the worst player on the field in the game versus Paraguay in November and didn't make an impact in March. The only thing he does well is contribute defensively. That's probably why Aguirre called him up, simply because he's good defensively, which Aguirre likes in his system that is defense first. But given the defense is already the strongest part of the team, why call up an offensive player who doesn't contribute or create offensively simply for being good on defense when we need more offensive creativity from the wingers? Why call up a player like that when Mexico needs more offensive creativity in its wingers? I don't like that Aguirre keeps calling up Piojo Alvarado just because he is playing on a good Chivas team. It doesn't mean he is good enough to be called up for the Mexico national team like his other Chivas teammates. Piojo Alvarado, he has had his opportunities, and it's time for the team to move forward without him. Alexi Dominguez and Osiel Herrera are both younger and better options than Piojo. Which brings me to the notable omission and player that was not included in this roster, Osiel Herrera. It is crazy and absolutely criminal that ever since the game versus Valencia, where he scored in that game, by the way, Aguirre has never called up Osiel Herrera since and has been reluctant to give him more opportunities with the national team. He has been great for Tigres over the last 3 years. Osiel has scored and contributed much more offensively than Piojo this season and has been so good to where now there are European teams interested in acquiring him in the summer. He is clearly a better option and player. But because Aguirre prefers Piojo Alvarado and is so stuck on Piojo Alvarado as his main right winger, Osiel Herrera's potential with the national team is being wasted. It really is a shame, and hopefully when Rafa Marquez becomes the head coach after the World Cup, he does integrate Osiel Herrera along with the other young and rising players like what is planned. But on the positive side, one of these right wingers who I have argued is a better option than Piojo has been included, Alexi Dominguez. This is a player that will be part of the future of the team in the next cycle, and in my opinion can be part of the team now. Like Mora, Vargas, and Montiel, Dominguez had a really solid U20 World Cup in Chile. He has been very solid for Pachuca as well. In my opinion, he should be part of the team now for the World Cup and going forward. Look for him to be competing to make the final roster with Piojo Alvarado in the Liguilla with Pachuca or in Mexico's preparation games versus Ghana and Australia this month if he gets called up to play in these games for Mexico. As for Diego Lainez, he is an interesting case because he has been in pretty solid form for Tigres. However, there are two things with him at the national team level that could be a problem and why he potentially won't be included in the final roster. The first is that he really hasn't been consistent with the national team, and specifically when it comes to his performances, he has often looked indecisive when he has the ball. That is not ideal, and second, there were reports and speculation that he wasn't included in the initial training camp this month because of disciplinary issues that occurred during Mexico's games in January. During the game versus Bolivia, Aguirre shouted tactical instructions to Diego Lainez that Lainez did not agree with, and they had a disagreement in terms of playing tactics during the game. There were also reports that Linus's presence with the team in the locker room wasn't good either. That there was tension and discipline issues that negatively affected teammate chemistry and team morale. It is possible Aguirre included him in the preliminary roster, believing that these disputes have now been settled. But if they aren't, Linus could be excluded from the World Cup again. As for Jorge Rubalcaba and Alexis Vega, I do think these two players are potentially competing between each other to make the final roster. Alexis Vega, after fully recovering from the surgery for his injury, has not looked the same with Toluca. And that is not good given entering March and this preliminary roster, he has really struggled to replicate the good form that he was showing before with Toluca. Meanwhile, Jorge Rubalcaba has had a really good start to the MLS season with Red Bull New York, with 4 goals so far. With this in mind, it is possible that if Vega doesn't perform well in the team's first 2 preparation games, and if Rubalcaba is able to replicate his good form with the national team, that Aguirre could call up Rubalcaba instead of Vega. We'll see, and it will be interesting to see what Javier Aguirre decides. Moving on to the main players, Raúl, Julián Quiñones, Hormiga González, and César Huerta. These are main players for the team in the offensive front. Raúl Jiménez is the best striker Mexico has right now and is going to be the starting striker in the World Cup. Julián Quiñones is a versatile player offensively who can play as a starting striker and as a winger on the left side. He has been in excellent form and is currently the top goal scorer in the Saudi Pro League with Al Qadisiyah. And there are reports of multiple European clubs being interested in acquiring him in the summer after the World Cup. It would be stupid to not include him in the final roster when he could be a starter alongside Raúl in a 2-striker formation. César Huerta has fully recovered from his injury and has been really solid for Anderlecht in his first games back. In my opinion, he is the best winger Mexico has in their player pool right now. He also should be part of the final roster and likely will be. And lastly, we have 3 strikers in Santi Jimenez, Germán Berterame, and Memote Martinez. With Memote's surprising inclusion on this list, many speculate that there is competition between these 3 to be the 4th striker Aguirre calls up for the World Cup, and that Aguirre is surprisingly unsure who to call up, which sounds crazy because it is crazy. In my opinion, Santi should be on the final roster. He is the best of these 3. He was always seen as the best depth option and substitute for Raúl over the last 2 years under Aguirre, and he is the one playing in Europe with AC Milan at the highest level. Meanwhile, Martinez, outside of 2 goals, one in 2023 and one in a preparation game before the Copa America, has been non-existent for the Mexico national team whenever he has been called up. He was non-existent in the Copa America and didn't even get any playing time in the March games versus Portugal and Belgium. He is not a short-term or long-term player or solution for the team and should not be part of the team going forward. As for Germán Berterame, I do agree that he is definitely on the hot seat and should not be part of the team either at this point. He has had a terrible start to the MLS season after joining Inter Miami, the only team that is actually competitive in a mediocre league. That's not good at all. And with the national team, it is clear Berterame doesn't fit within Aguirre's system and style of play, as oftentimes El Vasco has been playing Berterame outside of his normal position as a winger, which has not worked. And when Berterame has played as a starting 9, he hasn't made an impact either. When you consider all this, Santi should be one of the strikers Aguirre takes to the World Cup. If I were the coach, I would absolutely call up Santi Jimenez. He should not be wrongfully snubbed again like what happened under Tata Martino. If you have a player in Europe playing for a world-renowned club, he should be and needs to be called up over the others, especially a mid-level player like Memote, who lost his starting spot for Pumas Unam in Liga MX, a league that, let's be honest, is not as strong as Serie A. Because Mexico is not Morocco, with an elite player pool with over 30 players in Europe, where the national team can afford to potentially leave a Milan player off the team if that player isn't scoring like others who are playing in Europe. If you have a guy like Santi who is playing European top 5 football, no matter what, you call him up and have him in the roster because he is playing in one of the most elite leagues, and Mexico only has a handful of players at that level. And a player who is still part of Milan's team and getting minutes as a substitute, that's like being a guaranteed starter for any team outside of the European top 5 leagues. Julian Araujo, who wasn't getting starting time at Bournemouth, is perfect proof of this, instantly becoming a starting player for Celtic that the fans and club now love to have on their team. It is why Julian Araujo is also on this preliminary roster. If Santi is excluded again, it will send a bad message. It will send a bad message to Santi that will destroy his confidence after hardly being given a fair chance with the national team, making him wonder what more does he possibly have to do after making the big transfer after 2 incredible seasons with Feyenoord. And worst of all, snubbing Santi will send a bad message that discourages Mexican players from making the jump to Europe in the future. It will create this delusion that they can still be good enough even if they stay in Liga MX, and those who are thinking about playing in Europe might change their minds if they might not get called up and considered for the national team more over Liga MX players. With that, if Memote is just being called up for the preliminary roster in case more injuries occur, which again, hopefully not, in that scenario, that's okay. I'm fine with Memote being on the preliminary roster. I'll say the same thing for Berterame. But neither of these two players should be called up over Santi, Quiñones, Raúl, or Hormiga. These 4 players, along with Chino Huerta, they won the CONCACAF Nations League and the Gold Cup last year, and they will make up the best possible offensive front that Mexico can have at the World Cup. Look for these players to be in the final roster, along with a potential surprise in the other wingers included. There you have it. My full reaction and analysis of the preliminary roster. Overall, I will give head coach Javier Aguirre and this preliminary roster an A- grade. Overall, outside of Osiel Herrera, in my opinion, all of the best players Mexico has available are included in the preliminary roster. It's great to see the midfield have the depth that it does now as well. And it's also great to see players like Alex Padilla, Elias Montiel, and Alexis Dominguez also be included in this list along with the main players. With that, the final World Cup roster deadline and the deadline for Javier Aguirre and the Mexico national team to submit the final roster of 26 players that will make up Mexico's World Cup team is on June 1st, 2026, just 3 days before their final preparation friendly game versus Serbia. With that, it will be interesting to see what the final roster for Mexico will be, which players are included for the World Cup, and hopefully Aguirre and the team pleasantly surprise fans in this regard. Andres de AA Sports. Leave your opinions and reactions to the Mexico national team's preliminary roster for the World Cup in the comments. That will be all for this video. As always, if you enjoy my videos covering Mexican football and the Mexico national team, as well as the Mexico women's national team, leave a like and subscribe to support the channel and help it grow. And it will also keep you informed on all of my latest videos, including my latest videos covering the Mexico national team. With that, thanks for watching and listening. Viva Mexico!